Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Those of you who have been watching me for some time now know that one of my favorite newspapers is the Epoch Times. I actually get it delivered to my apartment weekly, and it is my favorite time of the week to pour through that newspaper because I learn so much, and the articles are just packed with amazing information. And so a few days ago, I was looking at this article, which reads, 12 controversial California policies took effect January 1st. So, apropos of the title, the Epoch Times article lists 12 laws that were passed at the start of the year that they deem to be controversial. And I thought, wow, that would be a really good timeless episode to look through some of these laws. And so what I did is that I started researching each of these laws. And I went through and I read the bills themselves. And then I got so interested that I kept going down these rabbit holes. And then I read the debates surrounding the bills, what the proponents and the opponents of the bills were saying. And I just couldn't believe some of the legal arguments, some of the rationale that were being used with these statutes. So I could go through all 12, but for the sake of time and interest, today I'm going to focus on two. One of them pertains to racial profiling with regard to policing in the state of California. And then a second one is a particularly controversial law. I'm sure that you have heard of it. It's about gender neutral toy sections. Apparently in California, if you have 500 or more employees at a toy store, you are now required to have a gender neutral toy section in that store. So again, we're going to focus on just those two today. And I want to go through why I find these to be both morally and legally objectionable. And I think they really lay bare the extent of the infiltration of DEI and these radical theories on race and gender and policing that have gotten so widespread that now they're in our laws. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless. It's great as always to be with you. As a reminder that in addition to Timeless, you can catch my show with Dennis Prager called Dennis and Julie, which is every Monday on this channel. And then Timeless is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays right here on the Julie Hartman YouTube channel. All of those shows premiere at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen to them on Apple and Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts. So yes, today we are looking at two new laws that have been passed right here in my home state, the state where we're filming this show right now, California. And I just want to start off by acknowledging that I am no legal expert. I didn't go to law school. I don't have, a credential in this, but I am someone who is very interested in the law. And what I endeavor to do in this show is make the law more understandable to everyday people, because it should be something that all of us should be able to understand and look at, even if we don't have a law degree. These are statutes that apply to all of us, that affect the way that we live. And also, our taxpayer money is being used to fund the people who make our laws. And we vote for those people, so we should understand what they are doing. And so today, I want to give a summary of these two statutes and really dive deep into what the reason for passing these laws was. Because these lawmakers have certain objectives that they want to fulfill when they are passing certain statutes. And on its face, the laws can seem reasonable, or they can seem like something that you may want, or something that maybe you just don't object to. But then when you kind of peel back the layers and you see the arguments that they're using, it presents a different picture. And a lot of these arguments that they're using, I think, sets up a harmful precedent for the way that the law can be twisted or applied in the future. So let's dive in. Let's start with this first law of the two that we're looking at, which pertains to traffic stops and policing. This is one of those things where you read it and there seems to be no problems. It seems like something that everyone would support. But then, as you'll see, the rationale is, I think, a bit shaky. So Again, credit to the Epoch Times for profiling these laws. But a quick summary of this first one, the traffic stop one, is that starting on January 1st, 2024, when a police officer is pulling over a suspect in a traffic stop, they are now required to do two things. The first thing is that they have to immediately tell the person that they are pulling over why they have decided to pull that person over. The second thing is that the police officer has to report a lot of details about what exactly went down in that interaction, what transpired, and specifically, that police officer is obligated to give a very detailed report about the immutable characteristics of the individual who they pulled over: the race, the ethnicity, the gender, even the sexuality status, the age, etc. So, looking here at this law, I'm just going to quickly read. This bill would, beginning on January 1st, 2024, required a peace officer. By the way, that's what they're calling them in these bills. I have no idea if it's a woke thing or just like a technical term. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a woke thing that they don't want to call police officers because policing is bad and peace officer sounds better, but that's what they're calling them. So this bill would require a peace officer to state the reason for the stop, unless the officer reasonably believes that withholding the reason is necessary to protect life or property from imminent threat. And then it goes on to list all of the things that the officer has to detail in a report, which would go to the Attorney General of the state of California. The police officer has to detail the time, the date, the location of the traffic stop, the reason for the traffic stop, the result of the traffic stop, and crucially, reading from here, and this is picture 2, for those of you who are watching, want to see the text in the bill itself, police officers are also obligated to state, quote, the perceived race or ethnicity, gender, and approximate age of the person stopped, provided that the identification of these characteristics shall be based on the observation and perception of the peace officer making the stop, and the information shall not be requested from the person stopped. So the police officer has to make a report if they pull over someone who they perceive to be gay, but they can't, according to this law, ask the person, hey, are you gay? Because I need to know, because I got to put it in my report to the Attorney General. So here's kind of the first issue, if you will, that I can identify with this law. On its surface, again, I don't see anything wrong with police officers, but that's what I mean by people, providing detailed reports of what transpired in an interaction. I'm a girl of transparency. I believe when you go to work, whatever your job is, you've got to be transparent with your boss. If you're a police officer, you got to be transparent to, the system to which you are working for of what happened. I am all for transparency. But the curious thing here is that this law is designed to help combat the effects of racial profiling, which these lawmakers cite are disproportionately affecting minorities and specifically people of color. So this law is trying to combat racial profiling, but then they are really focusing on having officers racially profile. And that is the issue. And this is something that we see time and time again in this country. I did a show recently here on Timeless where a 9th grade listener of the show actually sent me his ethnic studies curriculum, and he wanted me to expose it, which I did. And the thing that I found to be just kind of amazing about it was that the first half of the PowerPoint that I was looking at in that particular episode, the slides were about how in the United States, people in our history have been wrongfully judged based on the color of their skin or based on their sexuality or their gender. That people looked at Black people or looked at women or looked at gay people and made assumptions about who they would be like or what their life was like because of those, certainly in the case of race and gender, maybe not in the case of sexuality, those immutable characteristics. So the first half of the curriculum was decrying that we judge people based on their immutable characteristics. And then the second half of the ethnic studies curriculum, the teacher was doing the same thing. The teacher was creating an intersectionality chart, and they took Beyonce, and they literally, this teacher did this exercise where she listed the characteristics that made Beyonce, quote, privileged, and then list the characteristics that made Beyonce, quote, oppressed. And the privileged characteristics was that she's rich and that she's heterosexual. And the oppressed characteristics was that she's Black and she's a woman. How is that any different from judging people on their immutable characteristics as we did in the past? It's maybe done in a different way and done with a different objective, but it is the same problem. You, at the end of the day, are judging people based on their immutable characteristics, and you are sending students wrong signals. That it's bad in some cases, it was bad in the past, but it's good now. And this appears to be what's going on in this policing statute. And we see that in the hearing about this bill, again, I just didn't go through the bill itself. I went through the hearings and the memos that were sent around when the bill was up for debate and when it was being crafted. And if you look at the hearing of this bill, it similarly sends mixed messages. I want to pull up picture 3. It shows here in this hearing that they cite a racial profiling act where they say that officers are required to basically report details of the people who they stop. The race, the ethnicity, the gender, the age, lesbian, gay or bisexual or transgender status, English fluency, disability. And then, literally in the next paragraph, after they cite that law that says that officers are required to give these details, they cite another law which says that racial profiling is against the law. Quote, existing law prohibits law enforcement officers from engaging in racial profiling. So it seems to be these contradictory things. And think about it from the perspective of a police officer. You're being told in your training, just as these students were in their class, that racial profiling is bad. But then you're also told in your training that you've got to pay extra attention to the race or to the immutable characteristics of the people that you are pulling over. So from the perspective of a police officer, let's say you pull over someone who's a minority. Are you really going to be focused in that interaction on delivering justice, on investigating, on making sure that, you're doing your job? Or are you going to be so focused on the fact, oh my gosh, this is a minority that I pulled over. I've got to really make sure that I'm keeping track of this person's characteristics because I have to report it. And oh my God, I've been told not to racially profile. So I've got to be really careful here with the questions that I ask. What are you going to do as a police officer? You are going to be inhibited from fully carrying out your job responsibilities, which is to investigate people when they deserve or warrant investigation and to keep your community safe. You're not going to be focused on fully doing that if you're paying so much attention to the immutable characteristics of that person, which this law is encouraging you to do in the name of combating what they're encouraging you to do. It makes no sense. And the bottom line is it is going to make it harder for police officers, I think, to do their job because they're being sent these mixed signals, okay? So then let's go and look further at some of the rationale and the arguments behind this law. And it goes back to the reason why they are passing this, the reason why they want you as a police officer to state the reason that you are pulling someone over and do a whole analysis of the characteristics of the person you're pulling over is to combat racial profiling. This is their reason, okay? And so this is what they say. This is picture 4, if you want to pull it up. Quote, although racial profiling is prohibited, studies show that racial profiling by law enforcement does occur. And so listen to what they cite as statistics in order to substantiate their point that racial profiling does occur. They say, according to the Public Policy Institute of California, the first wave of data reflects that Black individuals are, quote, notably overrepresented in police stops. And then they say that although Black people make up 6% of the population in average reported jurisdictions, quote, they make up slightly more than 15% of all stops. And then they compare that number in that data to other groups, to white people, to Asian people, to Middle Eastern people, and they're basically saying that it's not the same. That for the percentage of the population that Black people constitute, they are stopped in traffic many times over that. And they say here, quote, in contrast, the state's two largest racial and ethnic groups, Latinos and whites, were slightly underrepresented as they make up about 41% and 35% of the population respectively, but around 40 and 33% of all stops. And then they say that Asians were wildly underrepresented. They're roughly 12% of the population, but make up 5.5% of all stops. Okay? This is faulty reasoning and evidence. Just because people of a certain racial group, according to this data, are stopped in a greater proportion to their representation in the population, that doesn't mean that the reason for that is racial profiling. Could it mean that the reason is racial profiling? Yes, it could. I'm not ruling that out as a possibility. That would be stupid and incorrect and false to do so. But it is also stupid, incorrect, and false to say that, again, those statistics are affirmative evidence that what's really going on is racial profiling. As uncomfortable as it is to acknowledge, Black people make up 13% of the United States population, but roughly 55% of all homicide perpetrators annually are Black. So, again, I'm sorry to say this, but if you are disproportionately committing crime, this is not just pertaining to Black people, this is any group of people. If you're disproportionately committing crime, you're going to be disproportionately pulled over. You're going to disproportionately go to jail. That is just the way it is. Again, that doesn't mean that racial profiling doesn't occur or that it may not contribute to a part of this. Of course it could. But do you see the problem here with the evidence that they are citing? They're making these gratuitous assertions. And this goes back. I mean, I saw this in college. I saw this in high school, that you throw out a piece of data and you point to that data as, well, evidence of discrimination. This is what we see all the time. Unequal outcomes equals discrimination. It can equal discrimination, but it doesn't always equal discrimination. They continue going on in this law. Reasons that they're citing for enacting this law. They continue with this argument that racial profiling is very rampant in the state of California among police officers. They cite even more data. This is picture 5. Quote, Black Californians are slightly more likely to be stopped than white individuals. Black individuals are more than twice as likely to be searched as white individuals. Stops of Black individuals are 3 times more likely to involve a weapon than stops of white individuals. So they're compiling data about alleged racial profiling, and they're trying to enact this law, which would require people to racially profile so that they can get more data on if people are being racially profiled. You can see the circular logic here. And again, going back to the job of a police officer, it is going to be really hard for that person to do their job with a clear head in the best possible way and just judge people based on their actions and not on their race if they think that they're going to be penalized if they pull a Black person over. Before we continue, I want to quickly tell you about MyPillow. I use a lot of MyPillow products. I walk into work wearing my slippers, I sleep on a MyPillow, and I use my towels. I wouldn't advertise this product if I didn't use it. And you can get a lot of these products at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6745. Now, MyPillow is obviously known for the pillow, but they didn't stop at the pillow. They also created the Giza Dream bed sheets, which are very comfortable to sleep on. I also sleep on them in addition to using the other products, and they're very helpful for making you feel comfortable and facilitating a better night's sleep. Mike Lindell found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. And these sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. They come in a variety of sizes and colors, and this deal is really spectacular. You get 50% off of the Giza Dream sheets. You'll get a set for as low as $29.98. If you go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman, you go on the website and click on the radio podcast square. There you will find not only this great offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, now even flannel sheets, and so much more. Just call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman. Another really damning part about this law, which is truly scary, is that the police officer has to tell the person the reason why they are being pulled over. That itself is not bad. But what is bad here is that if they don't tell the person why they are being pulled over immediately, then there might be legal recourse for that individual who is pulled over to have against the police officer. And specifically, if they are alleged to or accused of committing a crime and they go to court, they could, under this law, request that certain evidence be dismissed because that police officer didn't give them their full rights by not immediately telling them at the start of that interaction why they were being pulled over. This is straight here from the law. Quote, the law provides that failure to make the required statement is grounds for filing a motion to suppress using the procedures established in Penal Code Section 1538.5. Okay? So basically, they can say that certain admissions that they gave have to be dismissed because, again, they weren't given their full rights. The California State Sheriff's Association, unsurprisingly, objected to this law and certain requirements, maybe not the law in its entirety, but some of the requirements and provisions, including this one. And this is what they said with regard to this whole idea that you have to tell the person the reason, or if you don't, then they can file a motion to suppress. They say that this could, quote, end up ultimately keeping crucial information from a judge or jury if there is criminal activity discovered during the stop. A confession to a murder given by the subject of a traffic stop after the person has been Mirandized. That's telling their Miranda rights. You know, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to counsel. Continuing, after a person has been Mirandized, would be subject to a motion to suppress if the police officer started the stop with a question, any question, before stating the reason for the stop. This language creates the very real possibility of vast miscarriages of justice based on the simple timing of an officer asking if they may see the person's identification before telling the person why they were stopped. How does this make policing easier? And you know what? Maybe you listening can go, well, Julie, maybe the objective isn't to make policing easier. But why are you making policing harder for people? Cops have a very difficult job. They should do that job in a clean way. They should be moral. They should treat people fairly. And there should be things in place, such as reporting what happened in the interaction, to keep people honest. I am all for that. But really? If a cop doesn't immediately tell the person why they're being pulled over under this law, there can be a motion to suppress evidence as a result of that. To me, that certainly doesn't seem fair. And the whole point of this is to promote equity. This is what the lawmaker said. Literally, the author of this bill wrote, the purpose of this bill is to, quote, promote equity and accountability in communities across California. That is my goal. Equity is equality of outcomes. We should not be endeavoring for equality of outcomes. We should be endeavoring for equality in the way that people are treated. And then the outcomes, if carried out in a fair and righteous way, are the outcomes. So that's number one. This is why it's really, really important to actually read the law, because you read it, you go, what's so wrong with the police officer having to tell the person immediately the reason? What's so wrong with the police officer having to report all of the, immutable characteristics? Well, you know why. You know, because if the person doesn't report the reason, there could be a motion to suppress evidence. That's not good. And you know that a lot of this data, it appears, is being compiled in order to police officers' behavior with regard to potential racial profiling, which is going to make the police officers' job harder if they are just doing the right thing, because it's more likely they'll be accused of racially profiling even if they're not. So that's law number one. Let's go on to the gender-neutral toy section law. This one is a little easier, I think, to understand, but just as, if not more, faulty, I think, with regard to the rationale and the reasoning. So, oy vey, this law is just really a sign of the times. So basically, to give a synopsis, if you're in California and you're a toy store and you have 500 or more employees, you are now required under law to have a gender neutral toy section that is labeled and marked as such in that store. And if you don't have such a section, then you can be subject to a fine of, let's see, I believe it is $500 or more. Yes, those that fail to comply will be fined up to $250 for the first violation and $500 for a subsequent violation. Okay, so again, let's go through the rationale here surrounding that law, because people who are looking at it on its face may go, oh, well, what's so bad about that, right? You're just making people feel more comfortable. Well, actually, it's setting what I think is a very harmful legal precedent. What the law is supposed to do is enforce non-discrimination. It is not the role of the law to make you feel comfortable and welcomed and affirmed. And this is the territory that we are getting into, okay? So here's what they say. They cite a Civil Rights Act called the Unruh Civil Rights Act. There are all these civil rights acts in the United States at the federal level, at the state level. And what's important to understand is that during the second half of the 20th century, these civil rights acts were enforced because of Jim Crow. Because there were people in this country, Black people, who were not allowed to participate in the South in public accommodations, were not allowed to go into certain businesses because they were discriminated against on the color of their skin. So these civil rights laws, the purpose of those laws is really to be very basic. It's to say, if you're a business, you can't turn someone away because they're Black or because they're gay or because they're of a certain religion that you don't like. You have to let people in. That is the basis of those laws. And now they are really being twisted and distorted. So here's what they cite. They cite, as I said, the Unruh Civil Rights Act, which, quote, specifies that all persons within the jurisdiction of the state are free and equal, and no matter their sex, race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, disability, medical condition, you think I'm done, I'm not done, genetic information, marital status, sexual orientation, citizenship, primary language, or immigration status. That was a mouthful. Are entitled to the full and equal accommodations, advantages, facilities, privileges, or services in all business establishments of every kind, okay? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was phrased kind of differently than this one. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 said that you cannot discriminate on the basis of just 5 things: race, sex, gender, national origin, and ethnicity. This lists a very long litany of things and also adds language like full and equal accommodations, advantages. That's a key word. What does that mean? Advantages, privileges. Those are words that are very specific to the California state civil rights statute. And you can see how people seize on those words in order to enact certain policies that they want to enact. So here's combing through what the proponents of the bill said. It's really amazing. Quote, keeping similar items that are traditionally marketed either for girls or for boys separated makes it more difficult for the consumer to compare the products, and it incorrectly implies that their use by one gender is inappropriate. Let me ask you a question. Why is that the state's problem? Even if that is true, even if it is true that keeping, girls' toys on the left side of the store and boys' toys on the right side of the store makes it more difficult for the consumer to compare the products, the doll versus the fire truck, and it implies incorrectly that their use by one gender is inappropriate, that it's wrong for a boy to use a doll and wrong for a girl to use a fire truck. Let's say that is true. Why is that the job of the state to think about and remedy? That's just life. That doesn't have to do with discrimination. That is not what the Civil Rights Acts, the laws, were intended to do. This is getting way, way over the realm of what the government is supposed to do. And it is truly scary, okay? Let me continue. These are reasons that they are citing. This is from the Assembly floor analysis. This is all public information online that they are citing for enacting this law. Some children and parents may feel unwelcome or uncomfortable shopping in some areas of department stores that are segregated on the basis of gender, especially if the children are struggling with their gender identity or do not wish to identify with one gender. Again, why is that the problem of the state? Are those children denied entrance to the store? No, that would be the problem of the state. That would violate civil rights law. If they said, no, because you're non-binary or because you're struggling with your gender, you're not allowed to come into this store. That is in the jurisdiction of the state. It is not in the jurisdiction of the state if someone enters that store and they are made to feel, quote, unwelcome or uncomfortable shopping in certain areas. Let us think here about the precedent that this sets. Everybody has a claim to feel unwelcome or uncomfortable in a store. And where does this end? Okay, so yeah, maybe there are some non-binary children who walk into a store and they feel unwelcome or uncomfortable because there are girls sections and boys sections and no non-binary sections. But what if there's someone who walks into a store and they see a non-binary section and they feel unwelcome or uncomfortable because that doesn't accord with their worldview of things. And they think that by the store having a non-binary toy section, then the store is supporting radical theories of gender and forcing those radical theories of gender upon kids. What if that person feels uncomfortable? That person has a claim, if we're going down this route, to sue and say that they are entitled to not feel uncomfortable. Let's take this many steps further. And we are not only going down this road, we are here on this road because of this law and other laws like it. Let's say you're a Muslim and you walk into a kosher deli and there's a menorah there. If we're using these words and this rationale, that person can go, I feel unwelcome and uncomfortable because of the menorah up there. Where does this end? And again, I'm not picking on Muslims. I'm not picking on this. This literally applies to every single person. What if a Jewish person walks into a Muslim shop and sees a Quran? They can claim that they've been made to feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. Where does this end? And it is scary that the state is now coming in and telling private businesses what they can or cannot do, lest they be fined. We used to understand in this country that there were laws that applied to people, but in the private domain, private businesses are kind of their own entities and can operate however they want. And now that is being unraveled in the sake of making people feel better, but really, I think it's going to continue down a road that all of us are really, really going to regret. Oh, yes. Thank you, Sean. Sean just said, let's listen to how Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, defended this bill. This is recently on an appearance on Bill Maher.
There's a new law in this. I think we have way too many regulations and laws, as we've talked about. And this one, I think, says if you're a department store with over 500 employees, you have to have a gender-neutral toy department.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I get it.
So do you think that's silly? Do you think that's a silly thing that we too much government there?
That's an interesting one because the department stores came to us supporting that. And they're the ones making a case for that. They were making a case they're already moving in that direction.
Wanted you to make a law about them?
Well, but they supported the legislation. It wasn't legislation that was enacted, that was initiated from my office, but it was legislation that came up with interesting support from the industry itself. But I understand how that's exploited, and good people can disagree. But that's not something we woke up and said, this is a top priority for the state.
Okay. I don't get angry. This is actually making my blood boil. The amount of lies that this person said in the 30-second clip is truly a record. First of all, he's saying that there was support from the department stores. I read the bill. I read the debates going back and forth with the people who were supporting it and the lawyers and the people who were defending it and people who weren't. And there were objections from people representing department stores making arguments that these department stores are private entities that the state should not intervene in. So that is lie number one. Lie number two is that he's saying basically like, oh, well, we didn't just wake up one day and decide that this is something that we wanted to do. Of course it is. Again, you literally go online and you see that this actually started 2 years ago. This started in 2021, and you can look at the history and the timeline. I actually conveniently wrote it down here in my notes because I wanted to show you that it's just, even if you support this law, which you shouldn't because it is setting a very scary precedent, in addition to the fact that it is, I think, morally confusing and reprehensible to confuse children in this way, to force all of these gender theories down their throats, including when they go into a toy store. Let children be children. Don't force these political things onto them. You're just confusing them. But putting that aside, even if you support this bill, the question is, why is this what our California state legislature is focusing on when we have crime problems, homelessness problems, fentanyl problems? We have a public school crisis, especially here in the state of California. Test scores are at record lows, 3-decade lows. And this is what they are supporting? And yes, Gavin Newsom, your legislature did come up with this idea. And there is proof here online. I have summaries of parts of the timeline, chaptered by Secretary of State. That's in going back to 2021. This law was chaptered by Secretary of State. And then it says approved by governor, enrolled and presented to governor, in assembly, read second time, read third time, in committee, in Senate, in committee, in Senate, on and on and on and on. This is something that was cropped up by them. And the final thing I'll say with that Gavin Newsom clip is he's essentially arguing that he kind of had nothing to do with it. Well, you signed it into law and it was presented to you. It is on the timeline on the California State Legislature website, which has all of this information. This was presented to you several times. You approved of it and you ultimately signed it into law. So not so fast. Oh my God, that guy drives me nuts. I'll read to you a final thing from one of the proponents of this bill. This is called the Phluid Project. I don't really know how to pronounce it. Phluid. You tell me if you think I pronounced that wrong. I probably did. Never heard of it. But it's a sponsor of the bill. And they said that this bill is so good and so amazing, Queen, because it, quote, supports policies that empower consumers while creating safe and affirming spaces. Because apparently now it is the job of the government to create safe and affirming spaces. You let me know what you think about all of this. Honestly, I, during this episode, kept coming back to a thought that as much as I hate it, I may want to move out of the state of California because I truly do not want to give any kind of credence in my taxpayer money or in my presence at all to support this radicalism. But, you know, it's a luxury to be able to move. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but we all need to remember this. Forgive me if this is heavy-handed, when we go vote at the ballot box in our own states, and again, to be heavy-handed, also in this upcoming presidential election in 2024. When people wonder why so many people support Donald Trump, even though he has said and done objectively terrible things, this, my friends, is why. Thank you all very much for joining me. I'll see you soon.